Right. Good afternoon and a very warm welcome to Louise. It's fantastic to have Louise on the show today, as we do every week at 12 o'clock on a Friday. It's our Learning Your Lunchtime webinar, and really just an opportunity for our community and the Student Success Coach and anybody who wants to join in, get access to experts like Louise and people like Jeff Chen that we had on last year, who's a double PhD. We've had Daniel Robus, who is a serial entrepreneur and a recent MBA graduate. We had Bubu Bana, who runs Jobbox, which is a students' jobs platform. And in 2 weeks' time, we've got Melissa Ardendorf talking about student mental health. So these sessions on a Friday afternoon are really just so valuable and so insightful for students to hop on and get value. And we record these for the podcast as well. So if you're listening in on a podcast episode, you won't be able to see us, but I'm sure it's going to be an absolutely wonderful interview. So those of you that are joining us, and I just see so many students signing up now and getting onto the webinar, please do say hi in the chat. And I'd like to know which university you guys are from. And I'm particularly interested to see if anybody's here from Paka University, because I know that Paka's been sharing these sessions with their students from this week. So anybody from Paka, we'll give you a special prize to be announced later on. But usually we've got lots of people from Wits and Takis and Cape Town, Nelson Mandela, etc. So please do just pop a live chat into the comments there. Say how's it to myself and Louise. But we are going to be talking about academic editing today. So a very warm welcome to Louise. And we're going to get into all the tips and tricks and wonderful things that Louise can offer you to become a better writer yourself, as well as talk about her services. But before we get there, Louise, why don't you just give us some background, tell us about yourself, and how many of the books on the bookshelf behind you have you actually written or edited?
Unfortunately, none of them. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me, Peter. It's a real pleasure to be here and help everyone. So yeah, my background, finished my honors in English in 2010. And then from there, did a little bit of teaching in primary schools. Then I went into tertiary education, where I edited textbooks for the Independent Institute of Education. Mainly, I was the lead editor there for Vega and DSSA. Okay. And then from there, I moved on to financial services, a bit of a jump in industry. Worked 5 years at Momentum. And then after working for Momentum, I started getting into what we call corporate magazine publications. So I did their Financial Advisor magazine, and I also did their Jump magazine, which is their health membership magazine. And that interest in publishing just kind of grew and grew and grew. And eventually in 2020, I decided, okay, now I really need to get going back into publishing because my interest is just taking over. And in 2020, I started my honors in publishing, which I completed last year. And from there, I had a few stints in the publishing world as a fiction publisher. And I've also worked as an editorial assistant for Van Skyke publishers. And then I just realized, academic editing really is my calling. And that's why I decided to continue doing it full time now. I actually have run my business part time since 2014. But this is the first year that I've now decided to go all systems ahead and just do it on my own.
Really? Wow. So this year, hey, I mean, and just from your introduction, I mean, you are absolutely qualified and experienced. So we're so grateful to have your time today to talk through what you can offer us. But you've gone full time, you say, only from this year. Congratulations. And we wish you absolutely all of the best for that. And hopefully through this session, if we have you back on in future, people will be able to make use of your services because I think it is such an important thing for students to write well and to make sure that they submit, top quality academic reports and writing projects. So Louise, and I mean, just before we came on, just for everybody, as you're saying hi, and really appreciate that. And if you could then just start posting some questions in the chat. We're very keen to pick up the specific questions that people have on the chat today. So that Louise can answer them. And I can also talk from my own experience of having done a PhD, but not having anywhere near the level of professional experience that Louise has. We can certainly try and give you some actionable insights that you can take away from today to go and fix your academic writing. But before we get into that, just a funny story. Louise and I were chatting beforehand, and she mentioned she'd done some work with Random House, and I said, well, actually, wrote a book on woodworking, and it was published by Random House 5-6 years ago. And I pulled up the cover, and Louise said, "Oh, my dad's got that book," which was incredible. So we already had something in common, even though we've only just met through this webinar and a mutual friend. So first question coming through from Melissa: will the session be recorded? Absolutely. You just have to click exactly the same link that you'll have received and that you're watching it on now. Absolutely, it will be recorded and available for you to go back and have a look at. And maybe just to mention that it is the same for all our webinars. So if you are on the YouTube channel today, you'll be able to subscribe. So please just hit that subscribe button, and you'll be able to get access to all the webinars that we have every week. Join us live so you can actually ask your own questions, but then watch the recording afterwards, and you can see everybody else's questions and how we answered those and how we worked through those. So Louise, I mean, let's just get going. You obviously see a wide range of student writing projects and reports, and I mean, I guess you've built up a really good understanding, having seen so much student writing, of what are some of the common mistakes that students are making, and what would you say are the top 2 or 3 that we can just talk about now, and then maybe follow up, what are some of the solutions and suggestions and tips and techniques that you can help people with getting those things right? Okay,
well, I think the biggest issue that I've normally picked up, and they usually fall into these 3 categories. Either it's formatting, then you also have issues in terms of language, and then finally just referencing. In terms of where you fall, whether you're undergraduate, first year, second year, third year, or your postgraduate, honors, master's, doctorate, the same issues come up. I think with the undergrads, mainly the formatting issue, you don't realize that when your department says, listen, your margins have to be 2 centimeters, you have to type in Times New Roman. Some students might feel that that is kind of like taking away their individuality. And then you often find them coming back, and then they've done it in a new font, and there's color, and there's all these type of things. What I often say to undergrads is, listen, the formatting should follow what the instruction is. And the reason why your university or your lecturer does that, it's not that they're trying to cramp your style. What they're trying to do is teach you for later on, when you're postgraduate in your PhD level and you want to start publishing in journals internationally, those journals also have formatting things. They expect you to write in a certain way. They expect a certain formatting. So first thing I always say is just follow the instructions. I know it seems very, I don't want to do that, and I don't understand it, and I don't care for it. Just do it. You'll get more marks for it, most likely, because the thing is, everybody's assignments look the same then. And then your lecturer can really start focusing on the language, what you're trying to say. So we don't have that interference of the person trying to figure out why you put everything into double spacing when the instruction was clearly 1.5 or something like that. So formatting, very definitely one of the first things. Secondly, language. I think a lot of students, I understand, not all of us have a background or love for the English language. And some of us really struggle with it. But it is a tool to get your thoughts across. And unfortunately, in the world, English is kind of the business language. So if you're not good with English, I often say, just try and do small things. One of the first things that come to mind is keep your sentences short. Martin Cutts has a wonderful book called The Oxford Guide to Plain Language, and he gives 22 guidelines on how to write successfully. And one of the first things he says is chop up your snakes. If a sentence is more than 20 words, make it shorter. I've actually found that on average, most people write about 25 words per sentence. So I kind of let that slide. I don't, cut up a sentence unnecessarily, but keep to the 15 to 25 word rule per sentence. And if you start nearing 35, then the red warning light should definitely be going on and saying, whoa, this sentence is too long. The reason why we also do that is if you keep your sentences short, then you can have one idea per sentence. And then the person reading your text can actually focus on that one idea. And move on with where you're going, and they can follow. So they don't have to keep too many ideas in the back of their mind to remember what you said at the beginning of your 45-word sentence, to remember where you're going at the end of your 45-word sentence. So that's the language. And then obviously also you get a lot of worries about, do I write in passive voice? Do I write in active voice? I think in the past, passive voice used to be the style in academic writing. Nowadays, because obviously with inclusivity and all of those things, and as Sakai says, death by English, it has changed. I think the academic world has started realizing that, people are probably writing in a third or fourth language, English. So the simpler the language, the better. And this is actually something that has been around for a very, very long time. Albert Einstein, many, many years ago, actually said that if you cannot explain any idea to a 4-year-old and have them kind of understand where you're going with it, then you're not understanding the idea yourself. And that is the basis of plain language. We want to get all our ideas across. And then lastly, the referencing, I think as Gabby said a few weeks ago, students have this fear of getting it wrong or being thrown out of the university and expelled and not being able to go back to a tertiary institution in 5 years. Referencing is scary. And we understand why it's there. It's there to protect yourself and to protect others so that ideas are actually built upon and not just repeated over and over and over through plagiarism or stealing or whatever you want to call it. But I think something that a lot of students also don't realize is referencing is a formula. Whether you're writing in the Harvard style, the Chicago Manual of Style, any one of those, they all follow a formula. And it's usually a surname, a comma, initial, full stop, the title, full stop. You can quickly figure out what the formula is if you just pay a little bit of attention. And if you're unsure, YouTube is a wonderful source, even Google. If I don't understand something, I usually go and find it through Google. So that's mainly the three things. It's the formatting, the language, and the referencing that you see.
Okay, brilliant. Let's touch on the languaging and the referencing. And when I was doing my PhD at Wits University, every year I used to run a writing workshop for the postgrads there. And I think many in this community maybe met me at that time. And we since went on to develop a couple of online courses about academic writing. But every single workshop that I used to run, I used to ask two questions at the beginning. The first one was, who's writing English as a second or third language? And it was pretty much 80-90%. And then just related to that, I always used to ask people if they were busy with a writing project, if any of them wished they'd started writing earlier. And everybody also put their hand up. So the idea of also writing early to give you a chance, give yourself a better chance of writing better, was something that I also weaved into my workshops and my online courses. But on the language point, I think, linked to this idea of just simple, straightforward, active voice sentences being so important to make yourself clear and keep the reader in mind so that you're not exhausting their subconscious mind as they're trying to keep all of these long, complicated sentences going along. What I picked up in those workshops is that there is this perception that you have to write in this very complicated academic language because people see these very senior professors and editorial boards of journals around the world, and potentially have this idea that to be part of that club as it is, they also need to write in very complex academic language. But, even though you might, have a more sophisticated style, the more senior you become, you risk actually losing the thrust of your argument and the meaning of your sentences and your thesis effectively that you're trying to communicate if you abstract it with long-winded sentences. And I love what you said about, chop up the snakes. One of the techniques that I, sort of have taught and learned from other people was this idea of complexity last. So if you have two concepts in a sentence, you should rather have the more complex concept at the end of the sentence. So you give your reader the chance to get into the sentence, start with something that they're familiar with or that it's simpler potentially, and then build up to the more complex concept at the end of the sentence.
Absolutely. can include that in your paragraphs as well. I always say to people, if you think about whether you're writing an assignment, a mini dissertation, or a thesis, all of these things, including novels, including nonfiction, start at the beginning, you have a middle, and you have an end. And in the middle, you have different paragraphs with one idea flowing from another. And the same with every paragraph. A paragraph has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And that end flows into the next beginning, middle, and end. So I think a lot of students, that they complicate the matter unnecessarily because of the fact that, as you say, they haven't practiced writing often enough. And that leads to my other thing of, when you do get an editor, please don't phone me the night before. I can't edit a doctor's dissertation of 700 pages in 9 hours at 12 o'clock at night.
Yeah.
You have to build in time, whether it is for your writing, whether it is for your editing, whether it is for your final read-through to make sure, okay, everything's ready to go. Now I can submit it. I don't need to worry about my computer crashing. I don't need to worry about anything tripping me up for that final hurdle. Take a deep breath, get it done, do it on time, and then submit.
Yeah. So hence the point about just leaving enough time, and starting those writing projects as much earlier than you think you actually need them. I want to touch on referencing quickly, and then let's take Ethan's question there. Referencing, and I sort of in the engineering faculty have, used the IEEE referencing style. And I mean, I think we had a webinar, recently on referencing, or at least at the end of last year. And it certainly is something that for me in my PhD was a bit of a grudge. And I think so. You've got the writing aspect of referencing, but then you've got how you manage your sources as a researcher. So you have to formulate a topic, you have to formulate a thesis, and then go into the field and apply a research methodology. And as part of that, you're engaging in a field that has already been researched and for which there are already theories and work already done on it. So managing of sources in something like an EndNote or a Zotero, and linking that with the right tools and practices and habits to effective and accurate, properly formatted referencing by citing as you write in your actual physical document. For me, that's a whole value chain. The examiner will see the end result of the formatted reference, in your list at the back, and then as you're going through your paragraphs, etc. But what I try and teach in the course is to see that whole link. And I mean, when I started my PhD, I thought I'd get away with keeping a folder of PDFs, on my hard drive. And if you're not set up effectively as a researcher, as a postgraduate student doing a PhD or a master's, that whole value chain is going to be affected and ultimately result in poor quality writing, because you're going to have such a negative mindset around referencing, because every time you look for a source, you don't know where to find it, you don't know how to quickly access the citation in the right format, etc. So those tools and techniques and principles, something that I've spent a lot of time trying to help people understand, because I went through it myself, and I thought, well, I'm not going to get through my PhD if I don't get this right from the start. And by the time I did get to 1, 2 in the morning, and I was running late and I needed to submit things, and luckily I didn't, I had done most of the editing by then, etc. But if I needed to update things, I could quickly go back to sources, bring it in, reference it, cite it, etc.
Yes.
So I learned the hard way, and I'll share my referencing course in the chat there. I'll make it available for anybody for free if they want to jump in and get some tips and tricks on referencing. But Louise, do you want to pick up Ethan's question there, just from a more scientific, technical perspective of how do you manage compounds and equations and maybe engineering scientific calculations in writing research papers, and how does that link to sentences and paragraphs, and what are the good practices that you've seen in this regard?
I think mainly the thing there is what we call the KSS principle, which is the keep it simple, stupid, is that when you want to include a compound or formula or something, introduce it the way you would in language. If I say, listen, I'm going to give you a list of 10 items that you need to, excuse me, sorry, that you have to look at and understand, I usually have an introductory sentence. And the same with a formula. You say, listen, Excuse me, I've got a terrible frog in my throat at the moment.
No problem. Why don't you just grab a glass of water there, Louise, and I'll pick up where you were going. And I think what Louise
I'll
is
be
sort
back
of
now.
no, absolutely all good. I think what Louise is alluding to there, just as she gets a glass of water, Ethan, is that you must take your reader on the journey that you've already been on. You've walked a journey to get to understand these concepts and to develop these principles, and you can cite these equations, but your reader coming into it, they may be an expert in the field, but your specific argument around that specific equation or that specific structure of the compound or the experiment, etc., you cannot just spring that on them and expect to write well as you are sort of discussing it. You've got to build up your argument by starting with a simple introduction of it and then get into the complexity of it so that you can actually write effectively about it.
Yes. No, sorry. So that's exactly what I was saying, is the fact that think of how you would explain it to your mother, your father, your sister. They know nothing of the field. And I know it's a dangerous concept to think that, even the people reading your document might not understand. So you risk of the chance of writing too simplified. But I think it's very important to understand that what you're also trying to do in an article is not just to build on the researchers before you. You're actually trying to show the person that reading this that you know what you're talking about. You understand what happened before, you understand what happened during your research, and you are now paving the way for those to come after. And that's why it's so important to, as Peter said, build on the concepts and end with the very complex ones later on. Because you really can't just throw in a formula and have that explain itself. You need to interpret it for the reader. You need to interpret why this is important. And it's the same with referencing. Just saying, and I quote, I don't understand why that's important to you. And I don't understand why you feel that you couldn't have summarized it. Why did you feel that this person's way of saying it is the be all and end all? For instance, in humanities, we have a lot of researchers who have come up with phrases that we can't really change. Something that comes to mind is the concept of the Cold War that wasn't fought as a real war, but more as a media war. Things like that. The phrases are very important. But if I want to move beyond that and say, listen, I understand why the phrase is important, and I understand why it was so shocking to say, the Cold War was fought as a media war, it wasn't a real war. Then I can use that, but also if that concept is so familiar to my peers, then I don't really need to use it. I can just say, this is my interpretation of what that person said.
Okay, and Louise, let's just help Sakai here with some real practical tips that straight after this webinar, Sakai, we would like you to, maybe tackle a couple of those pages and fix some of those sentences that your prof is talking about. And maybe just to mention a useful book that I've picked up was How to Fix Your Academic Writing Troubles. And what they do there is they work backwards from examiner comments. So they, in their own professional academic career, were examiners, and they've grouped together all the common issues that they see, for example, with student sentence construction. So I'll pop a link up to that book just now, and you can go and check it out, because it actually works backwards from the examiner comments so that you can pick out which ones you need to address and apply their techniques. But maybe, let me have a bash, and then Louise, if you want to give Sakai a couple of suggestions there, and I think we've covered a couple of these. So Sakai, point number one, active voice. I would say point number two, and what I teach in my writing course is make sure that your subjects are, nouns. We often tend to write in abstract subjects, and that clutters our sentences with a lot of additional unnecessary words. And then you get to what Louise was saying earlier, you have these sentences that run over 3 or 4 lines. Often when you just go back and say, what is the active subject of my sentence? I must make it a person, a place, or an object. And often, because we're in this academic world, we talk in this abstract sense, like we talk about an emotion or a decision or something that isn't as concrete for the reader. as a person, a noun, or a place. And then that forces you to write a little bit more in the active voice. And then your verb, the action, the doing activity of your sentence. Again, what we tend to do is nominalize verbs. So we tend to convert a verb into the noun equivalent. And again, that might add another 2 or 3 words unnecessarily to your sentence. And then, as I mentioned earlier, start with the complex or the easier concepts at the beginning, and then lead up to the complex topics at the end of the sentence. So Louise, shame, Sakai's maybe got lots of red writing all over his sentences. And in a few minutes' time, what we're going to do is Louise has very kindly offered to run a bit more of an intimate group coaching session for 15 people. So we're going to run a little bit of a giveaway, and I'll tell you what the rules are for that just now. And I think Sakai would be somebody that's going to benefit so much for you to be able to have a look at his writing, look at his examiner's comments, and that's the kind of thing that you can do in a group coaching call, and is obviously one of the services that you offer, Louise. But you're very, kindly making that available for free for 15 people that are on this webinar. We'll announce exactly how we're going to do that just now. But Louise, thoughts for helping Sakai with some actionable steps that he can take after this webinar, specifically on sentence construction?
Well, as I said previously, maybe start looking at the length of your sentences. That's usually where problems do hide. Another thing that you can try that, strangely enough, Melissa actually taught me, is that you need to read your assignments backwards. I know it sounds very strange, and I don't mean word for word backwards. I mean sentence for sentence backwards. Start at the very last sentence and read that one, and see if you can't pick up something strange with just that sentence. Not in relation to what came before or what came after, just that sentence. Then read the second last sentence, same thing. What is that sentence on its own trying to say? And then oftentimes you start picking up things there. Another thing that I've also noticed is that, unfortunately, language and culture is intricately linked. The way in which we speak to our peers is the way in which we write. Very few of us actually have the ability to switch off our day-to-day personal way of speaking and then start writing in a very different manner. That is a skill that you need to practice. So something that you often also see is, and Professor John Lineker has spoken about this in all of his books, is that South Africans have a very definite way of speaking. And in our different groups, we also have a very definite way of speaking. So you often find Afrikaans people, they tend to confuse the is and are, was and were, because singular and plural is a concept that Afrikaans people tend to struggle with. And then also another thing that comes up in Afrikaans is that in English is a very polite language. So when I talk about myself and someone else, I usually put them before me. So I say my sister and I, not me and my sister. But in Afrikaans, it's the other way around. So what you also often see is, especially in the indigenous groups, we also have a way of talking in the continuous present tense. So you would have someone saying something like, I'm thinking, which is incorrect in English, because the thought is a state of being. You can't continuously do it. You either had a thought and it's past, or you are going to have a thought, but you're not having a thought right now. You see, that's the thing. Tenses also have a timeline associated to them that not a lot of people acknowledge. And then finally, something that we've noticed also from our Indian students is that, and I'm not sure if it is because of Tamil or Hindi, but they tend to make a word longer instead of shorter. So they don't use the apostrophe, possessive apostrophe, or the omission apostrophe. So instead of saying, we don't have enough time, they would say something like, we have too much of time. So it's small things like that that you can pick up, that is cultural things, actually, not just English things. And that's where it's so important to understand, are you writing in American English, or are you writing in British English, or are you writing in South African English? Because there you have more than just spelling and vocabulary. You've got cultural things as well.
Okay. Louise, thank you. I think those are brilliant tips, and Sakai indicated that he's very grateful for that. I've just popped the book that I mentioned up on the screen there, How to Fix Your Academic Writing Troubles. And actually what you can see is that each chapter comes from the perspective of a examiner's comment. And you can see in each of the chapters how they then sort of deal with that, which I thought was actually quite useful. Then I just wanted to have a look at another very good question here from Biani, how to actually get started and how to maintain momentum, especially when you have a lot of writing to do. This is something that comes up so often, Biani. So number one, I would say when you enjoy writing and you see your writing improving, then it becomes more natural for you to sit down and write. But I think at the earlier stages, maybe, and a lot of people have registered, it's the beginning of the academic year, and we're all trying to get back from the holidays and struggling to get into a bit of a routine. COVID has knocked our routine out, and we don't have the interaction and the normal life balance that we have. And now we've got this big assignment coming up, or a writing project, or a thesis that we've got to get in. And you're seeing this word count that you're expected to produce, but are you building up to that sufficiently? And is it going to be the quality that we've been speaking about in this webinar? So Biani, very simply, the technique that we've spoken about a lot of times is for you to commit, and I'm going to offer you now in the group to commit to all of us, and we call this technique burning your boats, that you're going to put in practice a daily writing habit of just 150, 200 words. It'll take you 40, 45 minutes. And initially that's going to be very rough, what we call generative writing, just writing for yourself, getting your thoughts down on paper. And as you do that every day, the quality of your natural writing will get better and better. But if you're not doing it every day, your fingers actually unlock your brain. And if your brain is getting clogged up because you're not doing enough writing, then you're going to paralyze your thought process. And as an academic that's solving problems and dealing with these complex issues in science and humanities and engineering, etc., if you're not getting your thoughts down on paper, even just for yourself, never mind for your examiner to pass a master's and a PhD, you're going to get frustrated and you're going to lose that momentum. So Biani, I'd like Louise to give her thoughts on that, but my actionable suggestion for you right now in this webinar on the chat is to commit to how many minutes, 30 minutes, 40, 45 minutes, don't promise too much, or how many words are you going to promise that you'll do every day between now and next Friday, and then come and join us in the members-only Facebook group for the Student Success Coach, and let us know how you're getting on a daily basis. So Louise, writing momentum, your thoughts for Biani?
Yes, totally agree. I love that concept of burning your boats, and it's actually something that Stephen King also purports to do. He literally sits down every day and writes for 2 hours. Sometimes he goes back and he tears all of it up. But the fact remains, he practiced. It's an exercise. You are constantly practicing writing. You're constantly practicing your thinking. You're constantly practicing how to reference. And that's something that I would encourage someone like Biani to do is, if you're telling somebody a story, notice when you say things like, so Sarah said, that's a reference. And it's the exact same thing that you do in your academic writing. In terms of momentum, something that I found to work very well for me was make use of the tutors. If your department has a tutor, don't just think that you get your assignment, you have to make this mad rush to get it done, and then you submit it and then you're graded on it. Most departments do have tutors, and you can go to the tutor with half an assignment and say, listen, can you read through this and tell me whether I'm on the right track or not? Sometimes you go to the tutors with a finished assignment and they will tear it up before your examiner does, and you still have time to go and fix those issues. So that's very important. I think even if it's just half a page, go to a tutor, go to a friend who's studying with you and say, listen, can you just have a look at this? And that is proofreading at its essence. It's asking another pair of eyes to look at something that you've been spending too much time with. And that's often where we pick up our issues, is that we're too close to the text. We spend too much time with it. And then it also helps sometimes, yes, momentum is important. But let's say, for instance, you're given an assignment before the Easter weekend that's coming up now. Do a mad dash, do the write, and then step back for 2 or 3 days and then come back to it and look at it with fresh eyes. Because then you might see a few things that you missed the first time around, or that you didn't include, or you might read it and go, well, this is not worthwhile, and you throw it out. That is totally normal. Even people, one of my own lecturers, she's busy with her PhD at the moment, and she recently had to negate 4 months worth of work.
Wow.
Now, you cry into your hands when that happens, but it's
Yeah.
normal. If it happens to a PhD student, it will happen to a first-year student. So again,
Exactly.
just keep calm. It is part of the process.
And I guess, Louise, ultimately what we're both saying is that you can fix poor quality writing. You can never fix no writing.
Exactly.
So start somewhere, and then, get a tutor, get a book, join this webinar, join your group coaching call. We're going to talk about your services just now. But the momentum combined with the improvement in the writing quality and the confidence that you get from seeing that writing and the feedback that you get from tutors and supervisors, I think builds, your confidence as an academic student. But there are going to be some bumps along the way. I mean, we've seen comments in the chat now, the professors are not happy with the writing style, and maybe they don't always give clear and detailed feedback. And I think this is where the kind of services that you offer can bridge that gap. Professor won't have the time to give detailed comments in every single sentence. They'll just say, reformulate this paragraph or these 2 pages, or this 4 months worth of work is useless because of whatever reason. And someone like yourself is going to be able to help people. So we've seen Wendy, she's already putting her hands up to say she needs that coaching course, pretty please. So what we're going to do, guys, as I mentioned just now, first of all, I'm going to ask Louise just to talk about the services that she provides and the Facebook group, which you can get access to inside the Student Success Coach Facebook group. But please also go and have a look at her page. But Louise, let's give you a chance to talk about the services that you offer as a freelance editor for everyone on the call today.
Okay, so my business's name is Strikethrough Professional Editing and Language Services, and mainly what I focus on is academic writing. I do editing for students. I also do proofreading. There is a little bit of a misconception as to what proofreading is and what editing is. So as I said earlier, proofreading is just a new set of eyes looking for general problems. Is there grammar issues? Is there maybe a punctuation mark missed? Is there a referencing that citation that should have been there that wasn't? So that's proofreading. Proofreading is literally, it's kind of finished. You just need a new set of eyes. Editing, however, goes into the bit more detail. We often talk about macro and micro edits, and macro edit is when you look at the whole document and the structure. And I remember I saw a comment earlier, how do you write an article in a law faculty? Well, technically, all articles are exactly the same. It doesn't matter the department. It starts with the introduction, then it has the aims, then you get to the methods and materials, then you get to the results, then you have a discussion of that, and then you conclude. That is the structure of nearly all academic writing, whether it's assignment, a mini dissertation, or thesis. So that's the macro edit. And then from there, we tend to go into the micro edit. Now, this is line editing, where line for line, we assess what you're writing. Are the ideas carrying on from each other? Or are you following exactly what should be followed in terms of formatting, referencing, all those things? So we really get into the nuts and bolts of it. And then another thing that I also do is sometimes students just need formatting help. Their writing has already been checked. So there I just help them, because Microsoft Word is a bit of a beast, let's be honest. Once you tame the beast, it's a really amazing program, but getting into it the first time around, and if you've never worked with Microsoft, it can be very daunting. And then, of course, there's also the IT things on the back that not a lot of people know. The difference between is that Word for Mac is not created by Microsoft. It's actually a program written by the Apple company. So what they do is that they look at the latest version of Word and they create their own version for the Mac. Okay. So there's a lot of things that aren't there. So if you work on a Mac, just be aware that Word is not on par with a Microsoft version. And the latest version of Microsoft, I must say, is very, very strong. I've noticed that it encourages plain language, where previously it just used to pick up spelling mistakes and grammar. Nowadays, it even looks for concise issues. It can help you write in plain language. So that's one of the wonderful things. But yeah, and then overall, if anybody needs help with English, whether it's normal writing, fictional writing, non-fiction writing, I also help with that if students have an interest in it.
Okay, brilliant, Louise. Yeah.
Sorry, I was just wanted to add, and then obviously having my background in education, I also like sharing posts regularly on small things that I come across where students ask me, listen, I'm having trouble this week with active voice. And then I kind of create little quick go-to guides that you can download and keep on your phone should there be a need for it.
No, wonderful. And absolutely, please continue to share. We've got the Student Success Coach Facebook group and you've got your page. And I think we must make all these resources available to students to help them be successful. And I think bridge the gap. I really feel there's a big gap between the sort of academic lecture and the outcomes that the university needs to achieve of getting students through the system and having sufficient publications and PhDs versus the actual on-the-ground student success where editors like yourself and coaches like myself really help students just find their way through and be successful ultimately. So Louise, thank you for just giving us a sense of your services there. We've seen a lot of interest on the chat to get into this exclusive coaching call that you're going to set up for free for 15 people. So the way that we're going to work it, so Wendy, I know that you're very keen, so you're going to have to get your fingers ready on the keyboard. If you are in a couple of previous webinars, you'll know how this works, but I'm going to put it up on the screen just now for everybody to have exactly the same equal opportunity to get access to it. And you're going to have to include a specific hashtag in a comment, and then we'll take the first 15 of those, and you can get in touch with Louise, and she'll set that Zoom call up for you. I think we said the 19th of April or somewhere around there. Hey?
Next week, the 10th of April.
10th of April. Okay, so you need to be available on the 10th of April, and Louise will let us know the time, etc. But we're going to check on the chat for the first 15 people to put the specific hashtag in the comments, and then you guys can get a full hour dedicated coaching with Louise. So you have to put hashtag pick me in your comment in the chat, and the first 15 people to comment on that, we will arrange that hour free group coaching call over Zoom with Louise for her to give you a little bit more intimate insights and support for the academic editing and proofreading support that you need. There was a comment on the screen just now while people are commenting and trying to get into that awesome opportunity, Louise. Somebody was talking about Word versus LaTeX because you were touching on Microsoft Word and then Word for Mac, etc. And I have done a couple of papers in LaTeX. In the engineering world, LaTeX is a little bit more popular. I haven't seen it too much in many of the other faculties, etc. But I guess just to give my thoughts to Marina, if you are not yet familiar with LaTeX and you've just heard about it, the big difference with Word is that it's not the technology called what you see is what you get. So when you are writing your project or your writing project in Microsoft Word, what you're actually typing up on the screen is what's going to be printed out or sent to your supervisor. And when you're struggling with tables and margins and formatting, and you fix it on the screen, you're fixing it for the end result. When you write in LaTeX, the system takes care of all the formatting for you. And you just have to understand the settings that need to be added in to that particular document that you're creating. And it's a completely different user interface in which you write your report, but your focus is then a lot more on the actual text and the numbers, if it's more scientific or quantitative, etc., that you need to be producing. So the advantage is that the settings are somewhat taken care of for you. The disadvantage is it takes a little bit of a while to get used to. So Louise, your thoughts on LaTeX and Word?
Absolutely. As you said, it depends on what the expectation is and how you want to reach that expectation. I think, in my opinion, if you're not technically minded, rather stick with Word and get an editor to fix the things. But I've also noticed that a lot of faculties, they prefer a certain style, and you see it with referencing as well. And that's where it's so very important when you get into something, whether you're jumping from industry, if let's say you did a background, you've got an undergrad in the sciences, and now all of a sudden you end up in law. Notice that there are differences in the faculties, and they've got certain expectations, whether it is the way in which they edit, the way in which they write, the way in which they reference. It's even in the way in which they submit their documents. You have some students contacting you, and then they ask whether you can edit their document as a PDF. Now, for any editor, that is a nightmare request, because you can't really change the thing. You have to literally go line by line, comment by comment, and you make suggested changes. So as I would say, stick with what your faculty expects of you. If they do expect LaTeX and you don't know about it, go and learn up. Just contact the faculty, see if there's somebody who can give you a short course or something. If there isn't, again, go to Google, go to YouTube. I even, last year with my honors in publishing, I had to do a mini dissertation and I had to do a case study. Now, I've never done a case study in my life. And my supervisor didn't have the time to explain to me, okay, well, this is a case study. This is how you set it up. And out of frustration, I went to the library and I just searched, case studies. I found books upon books about explaining how to write a case study. So even, again, if you're busy with your mini dissertation or your thesis and you need to do qualitative and quantitative study, try and find out if there aren't any books specifically geared to you in your field that can help. That's very important. And the thing also there, I think, that we haven't yet touched on with editors is where to go, which editor to choose, and where to find the editors. Because a lot of students also think that editors just run a quick spell check. That's why we can finalize a PhD the night before. We don't. We offer a personal service, professional service, and in that, we also spend a lot of time, and we expect you to build in some time for yourself to look through our changes and make sure that what we did is correct and what you intended to say. And that's why often I also say, especially if you're postgrad, honors, masters, doctoral level, not just building in the time, but building in the budget. Editing will cost money, unfortunately. But if you get an editor that is specialized in your field, or has an interest in your field, or has experience in your field, that will show eventually. I've had a few clients where they send me their work, I've worked on it, and then they came back and said, listen, you took me from a B to an A. And that was, I didn't rewrite any of their work. I just reorganized what was already available and made it better. So there's the important thing for that.
Okay, brilliant. Louise, thank you very much. I think we've had many more than 15 people sign up, but let's stick to the original rules that we provided to everybody, and you'll have to go back into the chat and take the first 15 and then correlate that back with people who get in touch with you through your Facebook page, and you can quite easily then send a message through to Louise. So I suggest straight after the webinar, just send a quick hashtag pick me message through to Louise, and Louise will then just have to cross-check which was the first 15 people, and the rest of you, I would still advise that you maybe stay in touch with Louise, and take advantage of her paid services, because investing in that could save you hours and hours of frustration, and potentially the massive cost of possibly dropping out or failing or not getting through your study. So it's obviously worthwhile just to sometimes spend a little bit of money and get the proper support and input that you need. Okay, a graduate hub at University of Pretoria usually give postgraduate students this kind of services. Look into that as well. Thanks very much, Jay Rams. I think that's absolutely good advice, and definitely all universities will have some level of support for students, and your first port of call should absolutely always be to exhaust those and find out how you can maximize those as well. Sarah says here, I use the Microsoft referencing system and the citations appear to be incorrect. How do I correct it? Sarah, I'm not too sure about all the details of, it doesn't sound like you're using a source library like EndNote or Zotero. I I'm not certain, Louise, I don't know what your view is, but the referencing tool inside Windows, I don't think would be necessarily sufficient for a PhD or master's, because you don't have the full source management. You really need to take the time to go and link it up with EndNote. And I've put the link to the course, which is free access for today, guys, in which I teach you the full setup and integration between Microsoft Word and EndNote, if that is the referencing tool that you use, and then how you can go and fix the citations that pulls through from EndNote, which is a plugin that you create in Microsoft Word called Cite as you write. And Louise was talking about just now, the versions of Microsoft Word and how it's getting better and better in terms of correcting your grammar and your sentence construction, etc. But when you set up EndNote as an example, you'll get a little button at the top there where you can quickly cite as you write and bring those references through into your paragraphs. But Louise, any thoughts on Sarah's challenge here about Microsoft referencing?
I think it's the same for Microsoft or EndNote as well. That yes, these systems are there. The general idea is for the system to get you further than you would have been if you'd done it from scratch. Unfortunately, whether you use EndNote or whether you use Microsoft, it still is important that you check the system. It's still a machine. It has still been given an algorithm to follow, and it might make a mistake. Or if you input the data incorrectly in EndNote, it will make a mistake. It doesn't necessarily, these are not online editors. They don't go and check your things for you. So like I say, in terms of Sarah's question, it also depends on what type of referencing system was required. And I'm not entirely sure if the citations are intake citations or referencing citations at the end, because you do get issues where Microsoft sometimes doesn't quite follow through on where it needs to be. But it depends on the individual problem there. And I think, unfortunately, that falls without the scope of this interview.
Yeah, no, sure. So a couple of students are asking for your contact details. So I put a link through to your page there, Louise. But I just wanted to finish off on that EndNote topic by saying, I share a couple of the war stories of my battles with EndNote and Microsoft Word in the course. And there were a couple of times when I had to uninstall it and reinstall it and set it up again. It is challenging. And this is why we said earlier, if you get going with it as soon as possible, in your degree, then you can iron out all of those issues and you're not leaving it too late, because even those tools, you need to get used to them, you need to set them up, and they don't work perfectly all the time. So some of those things will just come right the more time that you actually spend on them as early on as possible in your degree.
So can I just add to that? One of the things with referencing, especially that is kind of one of the big issues, is please remember that these referencing systems are updated regularly and they are adapted. Like, for instance, the Harvard system, that is a general author date citation system. You usually have the author's name followed by the date and then the rest of the information. Each faculty can adapt the Harvard. So where one faculty uses a comma, another one will use a semicolon. There will be differences in small things like that. Unfortunately, the bigger systems like the American Psychological Association, the APA system, I think they are now in their 7th edition. So they've made changes to their manual. Same with the Chicago Manual of Style. I think that's in its 17th edition. So also just make sure when you do use these things that you use the latest version. Find out what is the latest version. And again, you don't necessarily have to buy the textbooks for these things. A lot of these systems are online and are available online. Just Google the actual referencing system's name, and you might find, for instance, I think I found the Chicago Manual of Style online yesterday. So that's literally just Chicago Manual Style online, I think, .com. But then also, if you have trouble with language, the same thing counts there. Use the online dictionaries. If you are writing in British English, Oxford Advanced Learners Dictionary Online is an amazing resource. As you can see, I've got the Oxford here behind me. I use it every single day, even as an editor, even with a person with honours in English. I still forget how to spell words, or I forget the way in which the context of it used. For American English, Merriam-Webster is obviously also a great resource. And again, online, free, it's available. Just use it.
Fantastic. Well, brilliant, Louise. Thank you for all those resources. And as I've mentioned a couple of times, I've made my own referencing course available for free today. The link is in the chat. And I talk about a number of the things that Louise has mentioned. And I think she's obviously much more experienced than I am, but I certainly talk from the perspective of what I learned in my own PhD. And one of the benefits of using something like EndNote is it's got all of those latest versions loaded into EndNote. And what was quite interesting is even though I wrote my PhD in the IEEE format, I also submitted some work into a humanities journal, and I could quickly, change the referencing style in that drop down inside Microsoft Word without having to go through and change all those referencing, which was quite powerful. But it still took me the time and effort and energy and lots of experimentation to get it working well. So I've put Louise's contact details onto the chat there, and you guys can pick that up and really get in touch with her. And also, if you are one of the first 15 that we ran the competition just now, please do get in touch with Louise. Maybe, Louise, as we start wrapping up in the last few minutes, I think this is a very good question here because, arguments has to come through our writing. Writing is our vehicle, to make a contribution to the world through our studies. And everybody on the call today is passionate about a different topic, whether it's in engineering or medicine or anything else like that. And we have to formulate good arguments, good thesis statements, good problem statements, through which we go and then enter into the field, gather data, analyze it, and then write up a report. And writing, as we've said earlier, can be a blocker for that contribution. But in the context of being a good academic writer, what are your thoughts on constructing a good argument?
Again, I think just make sure that your reader is with you. Take their hand, guide them through where you're going. So I would always say, start with what is known. What do you want to establish that is the groundwork or the foundation of where you're going? Whether in your field there is been a general problem that a lot of people have come face to face with and they haven't been able to solve it, mention that. That's where the literature review comes in very importantly, because then you establish that foundation. You establish what has been said about this, what has been tried, what has failed, what has worked, what needs to be adapted, what have other scientists and researchers said about this field. Once you've established your groundwork, then you can say, okay, how are you going to handle this? Are you going to adapt somebody else's previous research? Are you doing your own thing and trying something new? And then walk me through what you did and how you did it and what results you found. And that's where the methods, materials, and results section comes in. And then you need to explain it to me, interpret it to me, so that I understand that you know what happened and that you've engaged with it. And then from there, you get your final conclusion, which is, this is where we're standing now, post my research, and where you think this research might go. And that's where it's so important in your conclusion to say, listen, my contribution has been X, but I think somebody else could take my things, adapt it, change it, go in their own direction and make another contribution. And then you give suggestions of further study. So I think that is generally same thing, whether it's on general structure from beginning to end, paragraph structure or sentence structure. You always establish what is known, what you're going to do, where you're going to go, and what the end result might be or was. And that's, again, where tenses are so important, because each section, whether it's your assignment, mini dissertation, or thesis, has a different tense. Because in the beginning, you're still going to do something. With the literature review, you're looking to the past, so you tend to write in the past tense or in the present tense, depending on your faculty. Because I know humanities, whether you're writing in literature lives in the constant present. So Hamlet killed his father today and yesterday and the day before, and he's going to do it tomorrow again. So that's where tense is so important. And then usually with the results, what did you find? Because now you're writing it post your research, you've already done it. And then the discussion obviously is also, looking back to what already happened.
Right. Louise, just last question then from Carmen. Are there any sites where we can check our plagiarism percentage?
There are many. You can try Turnitin. You can try PlagScan, I believe. But I'm not sure how many of them are free. Generally, I work on the concept of about 15% of your assignment should be references. And ideally, of that 15%, only 5% should be direct quotes. The rest should be reinterpretations in your own words, but with the cited reference. So maybe again, if you really need to find something, Google it, see what's available, and see if it costs anything.
Okay, perfect. And I just wanted to tell everybody about the student mental health webinar coming up with Melissa Ardendorf, and that's going to be in 2 weeks' time, guys. So next week there's no session, public holidays, so do enjoy and take a break. And as Louise was advising you earlier, there are a couple of holidays coming up, and give your brain a chance to rest, but maybe just get some writing in before then. So Biani, if you're still listening, I don't know whether you had a chance to think about whether you want to make a commitment and burn your boats, how many words you're going to get done over the next 5, 6, 7 days. But potentially before the public holidays next weekend, if you did a bit of writing every day, you could have 400, 500, 600 words potentially for whatever it is that you're working on. But we've got Melissa coming up. In fact, Louise, you know Melissa. You studied with her. So in 2 weeks' time, we're going to be talking about student mental health. So Louise, I mean, how important is student mental health? I think it's critical. I've had so many queries to feature someone like Melissa on these Friday webinars.
Oh, it's absolutely critical. I was just actually this morning watching a Sky News interview with the director of Birmingham University, and she was talking about the fact that the British government actually expects the resiliency of students to be on a much higher level than what it is. What people don't realize is working from home and studying from home has an impact. You're not seeing others. You're not engaging with others as you would. And I think especially in the academic field, that is so important, because that's where we bounce ideas off each other. We tell each other about things we've read and seen and learned. And if we're not together, then that's not happening. And it is a critical thing.
Yep, and I think, webinars like we have today and communities like we have in the Facebook group, and I put the link there for everybody to come in there and join us, and that's also how you can get access to Louise and myself. I offer a free 30-minute coaching call for people if they need some direction in their studies in any aspect, whether it's writing or other things. If it's proofreading and academic editing, I'll probably send you straight to Louise. But I've got a good network of many other aspects, experts that can help you. And if I can't, then I'll certainly send you through to those. But do pop into the Facebook group there and certainly get some support. And, also shout out if we can help you. We've got the mentorship program running, which Cara Demura spoke about a couple of weeks ago on the webinar. So there really is a lot of resources available to help you with your student success. And between Louise, who's very passionate and has gone now full-time into what she does, and myself, who does this part-time but feels, very passionately about helping students based on what I learned going through my own student journey. This is our commitment to your student success. So take advantage of it as best as you can. Louise, last thoughts then, just, from your side about what you offer, or academic editing in general, or proofreading, and, what are some actionable steps that people can take when they jump off this webinar now and get on with their Friday afternoon, and hopefully looking forward to a wonderful weekend. How can we just continue to be better and better academic writers in your view?
I think, like we said, follow all the steps that we mentioned. If you have to go back to the recording and make notes, do so. But if you do need an editor, please note that there are institutions available. We are not one or two of us in South Africa. There are quite a few of us. You're welcome to go to the Professional Editors Group of South Africa, which is PEG. There's also the Southern African Freelancers Association, which is SAFRIA. You can also look at PASA, the Publishing Association, or Publishers Association for South Africa. They all have lists of editors and editors who are either accredited or have been doing this for a while. If you can't go to one of those, ask your university librarian. They usually know where there are free sources, and please make use of them. Make use of your library, make use of your lecturers, make use of your tutors, anybody and anything that can help you. Please make use of it.
Yeah, I think that's just such a solid piece of advice to end off with. Reach out and just get someone support, some coaching. And I often find the 30-minute coaching calls that I have with people, it just gives a little bit of momentum, a little bit of direction. It gets them out of a rut. It gives them the support and encouragement. And actually, most of us can go and find the information that we need in many of these resources. But once we've had a conversation, it makes it just so much easier. So I think we've all had a wonderful opportunity this afternoon to listen to your thoughts and insights and hear other people's questions about academic proof editing and proofreading. And then 15 lucky people, Louise, are going to join you in your session. So I'm sure you're going to have some messages piling up in your Facebook inbox. Please just go and correlate those back to the chat and the sequence that they came in for the first 15, but I'll leave that with you. And on that note, go back through the chat if any of you need to pick up any of the other resources that we provided for you. And we will see you in 2 weeks talking student mental health with Melissa Ardendorf. So guys, we're going to leave it there. Have a good afternoon. Buyani, not too sure yet if you put a comment up onto the chat. I don't see it, but maybe you're going to join us in the Facebook group. I've also put the link there. And all the resources and everything that you've got through the webinar today, the link to the recording, the link to Louise's page, etc., I will put now into the Facebook group so that you've all got access to that. And we do look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks' time. Louise, thank you very much for joining us. All the best and have a super weekend ahead.
Thanks so much. Thank you for having me. Enjoy your weekend,
Cheers.
guys.
Thank you. Cheers, everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.